Actually, I've never. I have. I'm going to give you a political economy explanation of why Uganda's data about citizens is in silos. But before you go there, you said, given my advanced age of 112 years now, and given my global experience,
and being that you preach to us,
and given my wide experience, I'll give you just one example. In 2002, I was sponsored by the United Nations jointly with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany to go as an election observer to the German election. It was being contested between the Gerhard Schroeder and Joschka Stoiber. This one was CDU, the other one was SDP. So I spent 43 days in Germany following all these elections, dined with the leader of the opposition, dined with the chancellor, and all other political party leaders. I think the leader of the Communist Party was called Gizi, the leader of the Green Party was called Joschka Fischer, and the following things I noted. In Germany, they have one central registry, which is what you'd call the equivalent of NIRA here. So every citizen who is born is registered. Everyone who is naturalized as a citizen, if you come from outside and you become a citizen, you are registered there. If you die, they register you. So all information is done there. They issue a birth certificate, they issue a citizenship registration certificate, or they issue a death certificate. Now, as part of our election observatory role, we were provided this information. So when you turn 18, you receive a letter in your post office from the equivalent of NIRA saying, Timothy Nyangweso, you have turned 18 and therefore eligible to vote. I have always wondered, why does Uganda have, you don't need an election register. You need a citizenship registration, that's NIRA. They can have an interface at the Electoral Commission so that anyone, because if you turn 18 the day before the election, your information is with NIRA. You just go with your national ID and the date of your birth. You don't need to register me, assuming I turn 18 a week before the election or the day before the election. I'm not a registered voter. So I personally would suggest for government of Uganda broadly to end these silos so that you have the institution that offers national ID, the institution that issues passports, the institution that issues voter, you don't need a voter registration card, you just need national ID, the Electoral Commission, the people who issue driver's licenses, the people who issue your NEB numbers. All these things can be on one platform. So if you are UNEP, you can log on and be able to see students and follow that way. If you are issuing a passport, you can, at immigration, you can log on to that platform. If you are Electoral Commission, you can log on to that platform and know these are the voters available and this is the number of polling stations I need given the concentration of these voters in the particular areas. So if you're issuing driver's licenses, you also log on Ministry of Transport from the same portal. You don't need to have these silos. Electoral Commission has its own data. UNEB has its own data. NIRA has its own data. UBOS has its own data. Everybody has their own data.
Of the same person?
Of the same person. Why do you fragment it? So I'm coming now to the political economy of Uganda. This is also based on my experience as, first of all, as a journalist, two, as a politically, or let me say, a civic conscious human being, but also third, as a very old man. The political economy of Uganda is this, that you see the allocation of tenders and contracts to supply some of these services is contested by different fragments of the state. So the Electoral Commission, they want to have their own control. Because if you do a voter registration and all these biometrics, there is money there to be made. The people who are doing procurement, they will make their money. The ones who are doing it at NIRA are also cashing in on it. Driver's licenses, passports, too much. And in the process, it becomes difficult for the state of Uganda to create one central place because you are eliminating so many hands from the till of pillaging the state. That's the source of the incompetence. So I leave that one there. That I think the fragmentation of the state leads to interested parties want to control resources at a small level. So what may be individually beneficial to these people is nationally inefficient for the country in terms of data processing. So I want for me to come to the issue of voter education. I should tell you, by the way, I do not believe in voter education. Voter education assumes that there is a council of smart people who need to educate voters on what to do. Please, people, remember, the Constitution of Uganda says people are supreme. The citizens are supreme. Am I correct? They are sovereign. It assumes, the idea of democracy assumes
they
that
own the sovereign.
yes,
They are the
the
sovereign.
citizen is informed about their rights. If they're not informed about their rights, then you cannot have a democracy. So we have a democracy because citizens should be informed. Now, if there are gaps of information, there are interested parties. And this brings me to the NRM and the opposition parties. If you're NRM, it is in your interest to educate voters on how to vote, on when the day of the election is, and all these processes. The state should not take that role. Maybe Sarah Vireta, my great-granddaughter, could be interested because she's a civil society person and an activist. She may feel like she has an obligation to society or the church to do this. But I don't feel like the government should be involved in it. But the political parties who are interested should do that. One of the problems I find with the, let me ignore NRM. NRM has the infrastructure of the state, which allows it to punch above, far above its weight. But I see the opposition. If you look at the last election of 2021, the largest concentration of voters in Uganda are actually in Wakiso and Wakiso and Kampala districts. So Kampala had 1.3 million registered voters. I'm rounding off, it must have been 1.29. Okay. Wakiso had 1.2. Between them, they had 2.5 million voters. If you know Uganda's politics, you know that people who are in urban areas, who are educated, and they are the most hostile to the NRM. So if you are leader of the opposition, you are Bobby Wine, it is in your interest not only to conduct massive campaign, sensitization campaign in Kampala and Wakiso because of 2.5 million votes, but also to mobilize your base on that day to go to the polling station. Now, of the 1.3 million registered voters of Kampala, and the chairman of the Electoral Commission is here, can confirm for me, voter turnout in Kampala was 43%. 43. About 550,000 out of 1.3 million. So if your base is not showing up to vote, and then you say that they stole your votes, something must be happening in your mind. If you look at that election in Kampala, Bobi Wine got about 384,000 votes, Museveni got a paltry 126,000. So even if you multiplied Museveni's votes 3 times, he will not reach the number of Bobi Wine. So assuming Bobi Wine had mobilized 90% of Kampala to show up and vote, so he got 90% of the vote, he would have had 1 million. Now let me tell you about other regions. If you take the whole of northern region, rather the whole of Acholi region, total registered voters, if I'm not mistaken, let me remember, the total number of registered voters in Acholi region was 710,000. In West Nile, 1.2 million. In Lango, 1 million. In Karamoja, 330. So 3.2 million. Almost the same as Kampala and Wakiso. Just Kampala and Wakiso alone, if these people mobilize it seriously. But also remember that voter turnout in the northern region was 58%. It was very low. And I think it's because of the absence of message from the ballot paper. The people in the north were not willing to vote for Bobi Wine. But if you look at Buganda, which is Bobi Wine's stronghold, voter turnout was 55%. Out of 5.64 million registered voters, only 3 million showed up to vote. So this tells us something. And when I talk to these opposition people, I know they really, really hate me because yet I think I'm the ally. I'm giving them the best information. Please, 2 things. If you look at, again, his numbers, Simon Hill, bear with me. Although there are 1.3 million registered voters in Kampala and 1.2 million registered voters in Wakiso, the registration of youth in these 2 districts was very low. If I'm not mistaken, the older people registered heavily, but the youth registration was below 60% or something like that. I have that number, I can't find it. It was very low. But if you look at the voting patterns in Uganda, the older people are, the more they're likely to vote NRM and Museveni. The younger people are, people below 35 are likely to vote the opposition. And they're the largest number. You have very low registration rates in the demographic segment that is your base. And I think that one of the things that has killed this country, killed the opposition and undermined the era for democracy is that The opposition have convinced themselves that they win every election, but Museveni steals their votes. So if you convince yourself that you have won, therefore your challenge is not that you have not mobilized your base to register. You have not mobilized your base to turn out and vote. So you are living in a lie.
Okay.
So what happens with this voter registration is your supporters, it is in the interest of NRM and the other political parties to actually mobilize people to show up and register. It is also in the interest to mobilize them to show up and vote. It is also in the interest to be the ones driving this voter education. If they're not doing it, why are they expecting Santa Claus to come and do it for them? I rest my case.